episode this week contains content related to sexual violence, intimate partner violence, and domestic violence. Listener discretion advised. Hey, Crime Salad listeners. Welcome back to another episode of Crime Salad, where we talk true crime. My name is Ashley.
And I'm Ricky.
And I just want to say thank you all so much for those of you who support our show, who have became a patron, who just listen to our show. Some of our ads on here that we mention are really worth a listen and have cool savings. It just all means the world to us. So thank you. We realize that there are so many podcasts out there and you choose to listen to ours, and that is just huge to us. So we're sending you a giant Crime Salad group hug through this episode today. All right, let's jump in. You may have sensed a recurring theme in many of our cases that we cover, which too often includes elements of intimate partner violence. The term intimate partner violence sets out to differentiate itself from the common term domestic violence, where a father would be the abuser to the mother and the children, for example. Any violence which happens at the home. Now, intimate partner violence specifically covers people in personal, intimate, romantic relationships, regardless of gender, sexual orientation, or marital status. So it could be someone that you're dating, for instance. But both encounters often leave lasting effects on a victim. One of the positive side effects of the rise in popularity in true crime is that the public is becoming more and more aware that sometimes abuse doesn't leave a mark or a bruise. Yet so many victims often don't realize that domestic violence is never only skin deep. In fact, domestic violence always involves nuanced themes of abuse, which include, but are not limited to, emotional abuse, verbal abuse, coercive control, unwanted sexual demands, financial abuse, and any behavior that limits the victim's personal agency or autonomy. Even forms of self-censorship in a relationship can be elements of domestic violence. This could be a situation in which you can't express yourself freely, or you can't do or say certain things, which I feel like can be a very common thing in many relationships. And sadly, a lot of times, it's the abuser that breaks down the victim so much that they don't even realize that there is a problem, or they don't know how to even get help or get out of this abusive relationship, feeling like there's just no other way. So with that being said, look out for your family members, your friends. Keep an eye out for these things. A lot of the time, abuse is hidden in plain sight. And in today's case, we hope to highlight the more nuanced forms of domestic violence in hopes that it may become more recognizable and even save someone's life. In March of 2017, 37-year-old Alissa Mathewson believed her soon-to-be ex-husband Trevor Summers was a lying, manipulative control freak. But she never considered herself to be a victim of domestic violence until it was almost too late. Alissa had no idea she had spent the last 16 years of her life with a man who had perpetrated every element of intimate partner violence onto her, except for physical violence. But that was all about to change. Because until the early morning hours of March 11th, 2017, Alissa still believed domestic abuse meant black eyes and broken bones. Alissa was awakened that morning around 3 o'clock a.m. to water droplets on her face. As she fully regained consciousness, she realized that they were coming from a dark figure standing next to her bed. At first, she screamed and threw her water cup and tissue box at the dark figure until he spoke and said, "Alissa, calm down, it's just me." Just Me was her estranged husband with whom Alissa had a restraining order against for an event that happened the month prior. The couple had 5 children together, 3 of which were sleeping at her home that night. They included her oldest daughter, Arden, 14 at the time, and 7-year-old Bryn and 5-year-old Grady. Bryn and Grady were sleeping on both sides of Alissa, unaware of their father's presence. Before she knew what was happening, Trevor grabbed her by the ankles, pulled her off the bed to where he was standing. She immediately noticed he had scarves tied around the belt loops of his jeans. Trevor had come prepared for her abduction. Part of that preparation included turning their two oldest children, 14-year-old Arden and 12-year-old Landon, against their mother with a tactic known as parental alienation. It's actually a form of emotional child abuse under the domestic violence umbrella where one parent uses an intentional strategy to turn the child's emotions against the other parent and destroy their parent-child relationship. Trevor did this by telling his kids all the things that they could no longer have or do were because of their mother's abandonment. Despite being separated for over 6 months, when Trevor discovered Alissa had an online dating profile, he convinced their older children that their mother was cheating on him and had been throughout their entire marriage, which, of course, this wasn't true. Trevor controlled every aspect of Alissa's life, even dictating that she couldn't have any male friends on Facebook or in real life. Nonetheless, he convinced their children that their mother had not only betrayed him, but she had also betrayed them. As a result of this consistent manipulation, Landon and Arden had refused to see their mother, and he would often withhold the children from visitation with his soon-to-be ex-wife. So, it was very odd that Arden, who had just vandalized her mother's home a few days prior by pouring Kool-Aid in her bed and writing on her walls that she was a liar, suddenly wanted to spend time with her and spend the night. But this was all part of Trevor's plan. He needed Arden to spy on his ex-wife for him. He had both Landon and Arden check on their mother's phone, try to determine her phone password, check her purse for birth control pills, and monitor her phone usage while they were together. He also had Arden unplug the phone that night and leave a window open for him to enter. He convinced the kids that he was putting the family back together and only needed to speak to her about legal issues as well as to try to fix their family. In return for this betrayal, he promised the kids things that he never intended on providing. In fact, he texted Arden that, quote, "You will be rewarded greatly, my dear," end quote. Arden had wanted to go to Nevada to visit a friend, and he promised her that he would get Alissa's permission for the trip in writing. And for Landon, he promised the next day that the entire family would visit a wild animal sanctuary where they would get to feed and hold baby tigers. Arden and Landon were waiting in the family minivan while Trevor was inside assaulting his wife. As Trevor dragged his wife to the living room, her two younger children begged their father not to kill their mommy. Alissa wanted to keep her children calm and untraumatized as possible, so she told them she would be all right and they were to stay quietly in her room and go back to sleep. Alissa didn't know where Arden was at the time, but in her gut, she suspected that Arden had helped Trevor orchestrate this assault. Years later, Arden would suffer with feelings of guilt and resentment at her father's manipulation. At that moment, it all made sense to Alissa why Arden, who wasn't speaking to her a few days prior, suddenly wanted to come over and watch movies and spend the night. Alissa was so heartbroken that her husband had turned their daughter against her. But she also knew that Arden was a victim in all of this too. So while Alissa was tied up in the living room, Trevor texted their daughter Arden, who was still outside in the new minivan and had been for hours. It was almost daybreak, and he was worried that their youngest child, 3-year-old Cooper, who was at home alone at Trevor's house, would be waking up soon. So he instructed Arden to come into the house and take Bryn and Grady back to his home so that he could have more time to convince Alissa to come back to them as a family. But reuniting as a family was never Trevor's ultimate goal. As Alissa sat on the couch, tied up, she watched Arden come in and go to the master bedroom and usher Grady and Bryn outside where Landon was still waiting. Arden never looked at her mother, and Alissa knew it would be ineffective to ask for her help. Instead, she did her best to assure her two other children that she would be fine and would see them soon. Trevor tried to keep her calm by saying that his parents were coming to pick up the children so that they could talk. In actuality, his parents knew nothing about his plan, and he had allowed his 14-year-old daughter to drive herself and 3 of his other children the 35 minutes home to his house. Arden was terrified the entire time and promised to drive as slow as a grandpa. However, when she finally entered their subdivision, she pulled over and allowed 12-year-old Landon to drive the last few blocks home. And later, Trevor's decision to have his young children drive would result in charges of endangering the children. But Trevor didn't care about his children because his plan was finally coming together and he was finally in control again of his estranged wife. He wanted to keep her calm and compliant, so he began telling her a series of lies, which included the fact that he only wanted her to consider coming back to him and being a family again. Unbeknownst to Alissa, he also deleted the videos, which the police were able to later recover from her iCloud account, something Trevor, who was an Android user, didn't understand was possible. But Alissa refused to reunite. So to pass the time while she allegedly came to her senses, he and Alissa, according to him, had sex 4 times. As far as Trevor was concerned, this was all consensual because he traded the making of the videos, giving her custody and assets, for sex. Later, Trevor would egregiously argue that you can't rape the willing, even when the willing was hogtied and held at knife point. But Alissa called it rape because that's exactly what it was, rape. According to Trevor Summers, rape and sex are a matter of semantics, which we will cover a little later in this episode.
After their sexual encounters, or as it would later be legally known as sexual battery, Trevor forced Alissa to drink NyQuil so she would sleep while he decided what to do next. What he didn't tell her was that next on his agenda involved his first attempt at killing her. The scarves alone weren't keeping her tied up, and so he hogtied her with rope he brought with him and Christmas lights that he found in her garage. Then he turned her over and placed a pillow over her head until she lost consciousness. Alissa isn't sure how long she was unconscious, but she did eventually wake up with a pillow still over her head. Instead of trying to kill her again, he began telling Alissa that he was planning to leave the country and he wanted her to leave with him. He told her that he had a boat waiting to take them to the Caribbean, and he had $4.5 million in an offshore trust. And while this was obviously a far-fetched, grandiose story, there was an outside chance that some of it could be true, because Trevor just wasn't breaking the law by violating the restraining order. Trevor had also broken other laws too, and was about to be sentenced up to 4 years in federal prison for fraud and money laundering. You see, Trevor had a history of being a shady guy. He had a business entity where he defrauded investors into believing he had a business that placed advertisements on straws that would be given out for free to local restaurants. The name of the fake company was Straw Ads, and he told investors that he had already obtained a patent and had over $1 million invested into machinery and Food Safe Inc. And honestly, even though it was fake, that's kind of a good idea. But this next part is a bad idea. He also told his investors that he had already signed contracts with national businesses and from popular pop star Taylor Swift. See, Trevor even defrauded a friend from high school who described him as a weird but evil genius. Trevor was supposed to be sentenced a few months later in December of 2018. So to Alissa, his plan of leaving the country on a boat with money offshore seemed plausible. Trevor appeared matter-of-fact and calm throughout the entire ordeal, up until the moment that he got into her phone. While Alissa was hogtied, he used her thumbprint to get into her phone and went into the other room to go through its contents. There, he learned that Alissa had gone on a few dates, but was now exclusively spending time with Jeffrey Mathewson. This set Trevor's fake calm demeanor into an absolute rage. The last time Alissa saw Trevor this upset was on February 18th, almost a month prior.
On February 18th, Trevor Summers, who had until that day fought their divorce with pleas of reconciliation and court-related stall tactics, had suddenly changed his mind. He called Alissa and asked her to meet him at their former home, where he would have a notary waiting to sign their marital termination agreement. In the agreement, he suddenly was willing to give Alissa everything she had asked for and much, much more. He had offered her 50-50 custody, which would become 100% custody when Trevor was finally sentenced. He also was planning on giving her a $25,000 check plus a month's worth of alimony and child support. However, when she arrived, there wasn't a notary present because he wanted to talk to her first and apologize for the way he had been treating her. He was behaving out of character and even apologized for the way he had been acting and told her that he was looking forward to amicably co-parent with her. After they signed the documents and he wrote her a check, he asked her if she would agree to have sex one more time with him. Now, this would come up later in trial because Alissa agreed to have sex with him. This was a tactic that she used throughout their marriage, always giving in to his sexual demands to avoid his anger and wrath. Later, Trevor would tell police that, quote, sex didn't mean that much to his wife, but the prosecutor's office would disagree. After the two had consensual sex, Alissa wanted to leave, which was when Trevor pulled out a machete from under his bed and held Alissa at knife point for hours. He tied her up with rope and duct tape and told her that she had destroyed their family. She was a liar, and he wasn't going to take it from her any longer. Eventually, Trevor calmed down when Alissa agreed to try again and put their family back together. She also promised not to call the police. Once he allowed her to leave, she immediately went to the police, who began investigating her allegations instead of just arresting Trevor. This was because she admitted that their first sexual encounter was consensual, but in actuality, it was the furthest thing from a consensual encounter. This pattern and act of giving in to Trevor's sexual demands to avoid his wrath is a form of intimate partner violence. However, the police saw this situation as a he said, she said scenario. The next day, Alissa and her attorney went to the courthouse and applied for and received a temporary injunction against Trevor, preventing him from coming near her or her home. In retaliation, Trevor was able to convince his son Landon to say that Alissa had attacked him and had hit their 12-year-old son. Because of these false allegations, Trevor was also able to get a restraining order against Alissa, as well as keeping her from the family home and from their oldest son. Custody handoffs were now conducted at the park a few blocks from their home, with Arden walking the children to and from their mother's car. It was also this event that caused Arden to go to her mother's home and vandalize it, including writing on the walls and calling her mother a liar. In similar fashion to the February event, Alissa began making promises to Trevor. She told him that she wanted to say goodbye to their children, but would then leave the country with him. He still didn't fully trust her, so he tied her hands behind her back and led her to her new car, which was a Saturn Outlook SUV. But instead of driving her to his home to say goodbye to the children, he drove her to a Walgreens instead. He went inside to go get more NyQuil. Police believe that he was having a hard time killing his wife, and he wanted her in a deep sleep before he tried to take her life again. While he was in the store, Alissa managed to turn her back to the passenger door and open it. From there, she began running away from the car and screaming for someone to help her and call 911. At that moment, Trevor saw her running through the parking lot, abandoned his purchase, and went to recapture her as quickly as possible. It was this act that caused the clerk to look out the window and saw Trevor struggling with Alissa and dragging her back to the SUV. That clerk was able to get the license plate off Alissa's vehicle and call 911 to report her abduction. And luckily, surveillance camera video backed up the clerk's story. It's that call that likely saved Alissa's life, but not before she endured another terrorizing 30 hours in captivity. As Trevor drove away, he threw their phones out the window and found a wooded area in Hillsborough County to hide out. Trevor was enraged and told Alissa because of her actions, she wasn't going to be allowed to say goodbye to their children. He also took a razor blade and sliced through one of her wrists and told her that was her punishment for her escape attempt. So she would understand that, quote, love hurts. Later, Trevor would say to pass the time, the two engaged in consensual sex again and talked for hours. Trevor saw Alissa as nothing more than his property, and sex was still his right as her property owner. Eventually, Alissa told him she didn't want to go on the boat with him anymore, and to continue to keep her compliant, he agreed he would let her go once he was safely out of the country. But there was never a boat or a plan to leave the country. There was only a plan for Trevor to punish his wife, who was no longer susceptible to his manipulation or controllable by his moods and lies. To calm her down, he began writing fake confession letters that he never intended for anyone to see. His fake confession letter began by stating, quote, "On March 11th, I convinced my oldest daughter to let me in Alissa's house to talk to her one last time to try to convince Alissa to come home. Using force, I fought with Alissa and tied her up in her bed until she agreed to leave with me. She got into her car with me, and we drove for hours until we found a secluded place where we sat and talked all day Saturday and Sunday. She tried to escape once from her ties, and I cut her wrist once. I wanted her to leave town with me, which she originally agreed to do, but changed her mind. Signed, Trevor Summers." In addition to this fake confession, he also wrote a letter giving all of his possessions to his wife, including the contents of his bank account and full custody of all 5 of his children. This, too, was a meaningless document because, unbeknownst to Alissa, he had penned a suicide note that she knew absolutely nothing about. The suicide note was addressed to their 5 children and began by stating, quote, "Dear Arden, Landon, Bryn, Grady, and Cooper, you are wonderful children of God. You will always have the most special place in our hearts. You deserve more than we could give you, and we leave you to protect you from us. We should have never gone down the road of divorce that tore our family apart, and more importantly, hurt you in the process. So we have ended it for your sake. You have good people in your lives that will help you and raise you to grow up better than we could have done. We gave you a good foundation and hope you remember all the good memories and right things we taught you. Try to forget the past few months because we said and did a lot of things we regret. Please forgive us and know that we sacrificed ourselves to give you a better life. Grow up strong in the Lord and pray to Him for your guidance and understanding. Love others always and try your best in all you do. Remember, nothing that we have done or said is any of your fault. It's our faults, our mistakes that made us undeserving parents. We wish you the best in everything you do and will be watching you from heaven. Take care of each other and know that you are precious to God. Love you, Dad and Mom, Trevor and Alissa." The pure selfishness of burdening his children into helping him and then leaving them, feeling responsible for their mother's murder, would have haunted them for the rest of their lives. Something a narcissistic psychopath like Trevor could have never comprehended or care about. He never intended to allow his wife to live, and he never gave any consideration to how that reality might hurt his children. He only thought of himself and how he planned to spend his last few remaining hours with her while he dangled freedom and repeatedly sexually assaulted her. He had lost control of a woman that he had controlled since she was a teenager, and he was going to punish her for every last second they both had on Earth. Now, Trevor had been listening to the radio and heard that there was a manhunt out for him, but he was hungry. So Monday morning, more than 30 hours later, he drove himself and Alissa to McDonald's for one final meal together. To prevent her from trying to escape again, this time he moved her to the 3rd row so she couldn't open a door again. But he was still worried that someone had spotted his car, and he was right. With his time short, he drove them both to the little harbor area where he parked Alissa's car under a stilted vacation beach home. He was still making empty promises that he would let her go once he was safely on the boat that was never coming, and he got himself safely out of the country to a place he was never going. Instead, he decided to write one last letter. This time, he began writing a letter to his parents. He wanted to apologize to them and explained his actions, but this perplexed Alissa, and she asked him, "Why are you writing a letter to your parents if they were in on this scheme?" Alissa was still under the impression that Trevor's parents had driven her children home 2 nights earlier. Being caught in a lie, this enraged Trevor, so he went back to the 3rd row of the vehicle, took the rope he had used earlier, and began strangling Alissa with the intention of killing her. Fortunately for Alissa, he had allowed her to have her hands tied in the front while they ate their food, and had forgotten to move them behind her back again. Even with one wrist still bleeding, Alissa was able to fight and push Trevor off of her. Ultimately, she got her tied hands wedged between her neck and the rope, which actually prevented him from compressing her carotid artery and allowing her to stay conscious. That's when Trevor thought a car parked down the road had spotted them. He was concerned the police had found them, and he was right again. He scrambled back to the front seat and took the same razor blade he had used on Alissa to cut her wrist and used it to superficially slice the side of his neck. He told Alissa there were police coming up on them in a Chevy Malibu, and as he sliced his neck, he told her he was letting down his life for her, and she didn't deserve it, and she was unworthy of his sacrifice. His sacrifice turned out to be a non-life-threatening injury that would later require stitches to repair. When Alissa was found, she was shocked that she actually lived through the ordeal, and later experts on domestic violence would praise her for her efforts to stay alive by playing along with Trevor and at times telling him what he wanted to hear. Hillsborough County Sheriff David G. would later say that the public was an integral component to saving Alissa's life. Trevor was originally charged with kidnapping, grand theft auto, and violation of domestic violence injunction. But later, those charges would be increased to 2 counts of attempted murder, 1 count of kidnapping, 2 counts of sexual battery, 4 counts of child neglect, 1 count of grand theft auto, and 1 count of violating a protection order. Once Trevor was in custody, he did his best to control everything that was still within his control, and for now, that meant his defense. He tried his best to continue to avoid responsibility. Between delays due to COVID, delays he caused himself from constantly hiring and firing private counsel, delays caused by firing his public defender, and finally delays caused by getting the judge to challenge himself, it would take 5 years to finally go to trial. On August 31st, 2022, a new judge was prepared to finally try this case, despite Trevor's best efforts to again force a delay. Now, at the start of the trial, Trevor was representing himself, and the judge did his best to explain the pitfalls of self-representation. Trevor wanted to have the best of both worlds available to him for his legal defense. He expected to have a public defender sit at his table for consultation, advice, and legal strategy. But again, the judge wasn't having it. He said there was no law that required him to have a hybrid defense, and he either had to go all in and represent himself, or he had to turn over his case to the public defender. As soon as Trevor realized the judge wasn't going to allow any more delaying tactics, Trevor backed down immediately and allowed himself to be represented by a public defender. Despite now being represented by a public defender who openly stated the two didn't get along, he was still very much in control of his defense. That included striking all female jurors. Trevor's case was going to be decided by an all-male jury, something he smugly believed was a win. And maybe it was until Trevor did what Trevor does best: control, lie, and manipulate. Now, after Alissa had testified, Trevor once again demanded the judge allow him to fire his attorney and represent himself, something that the judge tried very hard to talk him out of. The judge made sure that Trevor knew that once this decision was made, there was no going back. Trevor had to represent himself through closing arguments. Trevor was outraged that his ex-wife would get on the stand and bear witness against his almost 2 decades of abuse. He was sure he could easily manipulate and control her again if he were allowed to cross-examine her himself, something he had a legal right to do. What he couldn't have imagined was that by cross-examining her, he solidified her as a strong and credible witness. This meant that Trevor would also be allowed to cross-examine his children as well. He began his cross-examination by calling her Mrs. Summers, and then correcting himself with disdain in his voice, calling her Mrs. Mathewson, since she was now remarried. The way he used a deadly calm to cross-examine Alissa gave the jury a glimpse into his controlling behavior, which included gaslighting, minimizing language, and using transparent bluffs. He would often try to trick her into admitting something by saying, quote, "Would it surprise you to know that there is a videotape or written evidence saying otherwise?" End quote. He used this tactic constantly, hoping it would make her doubt herself and seem less credible to the jury. But she never took the bait. She blatantly defied him and said, yes, it would surprise me because no such evidence existed. And she was right, because he never had any evidence to contradict her testimony. Another thing she did was refuse to look at him throughout her direct testimony and cross-examination. At one point, he asked her if the prosecution was giving her the answers and asked the judge to make her look at him, which she refuted. She stated all of her answers were her own and she wasn't looking at the prosecution. She was focusing on something in the courtroom to avoid ever having to look at him again. It was a very empowering moment. Some of the most degrading questioning happened when he tried to get her to agree that their, quote, sexual encounters were consensual, and it didn't go well for him.
Well, if you say we had sex before the videos, then let's talk about sex. You simply call it sex in your statements, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Did I threaten you to have sex?
You broke into my home in the middle of the night when I was sleeping, attacked me and tied me up. I take that as, yes, you threatened me to have sex with you. Yes.
I'm asking you specifically, before we had sex, did I threaten you or force you to have sex with me?
My answer is yes, you forced me to have sex with you.
Did I hold you down?
No.
Did I push you?
Not at that time of having sex, but prior to having sex, you did push me, you did hold me down, you did tie me up, you did attack me, and you did break into my home when I was sleeping. You raped me.
So you're calling it rape?
It is. That is the definition of rape, to come into someone's home and attack them and tie them up and then have sex with them. That is the definition of rape.
Did you know I was doing it?
Throughout his cross-examination, he used subtle manipulation tactics like using the words we and sex and us, trying to gaslight and imply that this was just two married people going through a rough time and working out their differences. Trevor even had the audacity to ask the judge to drop the rape charges against him because at one point during her testimony, Alissa admitted that, quote, sex didn't mean that much to her. What she meant by saying it didn't mean that much to her was that by withholding sex from Trevor, which was something he saw as his right, she would only have to endure his anger. So she complied because it was the easiest way to avoid an argument. The most revealing thing about this cross-examination was that he always saw and treated Alissa like his property. Perhaps he thought that this would play well to the all-male jury, but he couldn't have been more wrong. During his closing arguments, he had the audacity to argue that all the, quote, wrestling around were just the complicated issues surrounding his divorce. He also asked the all-male jury to focus on Alissa's, quote, over-the-top answers to simple questions, which they did. Now, 45-year-old Trevor Summers was found guilty on all 11 charges in a verdict that took less than 5 hours to reach. He will be sentenced later this year and faces up to life in prison for his crimes. Now, if you or anyone you know is experiencing domestic violence or intimate partner abuse, you can call 1-800-700-SAFE or 7233 for assistance. The National Domestic Violence Hotline aids victims of domestic abuse with advocates to assist victims or help with crisis intervention, safety planning, and referral to local service providers in your area. Thank you all so much for listening to this week's episode. We will see you next week.
Crime Salad is a Weird Salad production.
Are you kidding me? That was perfect.